Indigenous chefs and Indigenous cuisine, or Canadian cuisine, have been gaining more exposure and popularity in Waterloo region all across the country, really. But this, the original farm-to-table approach, faces obstacles to its growth and its reach. Our food columnist Andrew Coppolino talked to Indigenous chef Destiny Moser about her new project. It's called Cedar Spoon Indigenous Catering. It's a partnership with Bingamans. And she explained how it has allowed her to create awareness and opportunities for the cuisine to grow. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Craig.
So who is Destiny, and what's the story behind her business, Cedar Spoon?
Yeah, Destiny Moser, local personal chef. She runs a company called Foodzen. She has Indigenous background. She's a Ojibwe of the Rainy River Band. She trained formally at Top Tukes here in Kitchener. The germ of this idea came from a recent art show, Indigenous art fair that occurred, and she participated in that this past summer. Got really good response. So she's teamed up with Bingamans to create Cedar Spoon Indigenous Catering. The pairing is dedicated to getting the recognition and the awareness about Indigenous cooks and the things that they deserve to be sort of recognized for here in the region. As for the name, I think it's a very good one. Moser explains it.
Cedar is one of the medicines of the Indigenous people. It's healing, so especially as we're going through this time of truth and reconciliation, cedar is very strong, it's resilient. And then the other thing is that I really wanted to come from a place where I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth. You know, I had to go through all of these hurdles to get where I am, so more of like that wooden spoon effect.
Moser says that the food connects and heals that she cooks. Her interest comes from wanting to cook good food and teach others its history, but it's also grounded in some self-exploration of herself and her own culture.
My mom actually passed away a couple years ago, and we've been on a reconciliation journey as well. So when I had the opportunity to think about food, I really wanted to learn more about my culture by digging into the Indigenous food culture.
Her mom was one of the 60s Scoop kids, and she ended up being adopted by a family here in Waterloo region, and that's where Moser was born. Her cuisine, though, is the essence of what is Indigenous in this area. It's hyper-local, it's seasonal. You would use bison instead of beef, maple syrup instead of brown sugar, sumac instead of lemon, sunflower oil instead of olive oil, some really good things. Using plants, herbs, roots, bark, flowers, any native species really that grows here. For Moser, food is sustenance, it's enjoyment, it's healing, and she used an interesting phrase that really caught my ear. She describes her food as her love language.
How so?
Well, that's the kind of interesting thing. It's more than just food in that sort of Indigenous pantry, according to Moser.
Everybody has a different love language. Some it's through communication, some it's through touch. For me, it's through food. It's the way I'm easily able to express myself. I'm not one who's easy to talk with or share my feelings. So that's what my way of showing you how I care about you, how I feel about you, and to make you feel special.
And that in turn led us to a discussion about her farm and table approach, as you mentioned earlier, which isn't at all that different from the movement that we're familiar with, and we've talked about here on this segment quite often. The difference is the inclusion of what has been excluded, the Indigenous cuisine elements.
What makes me excited to be a cook is the story behind the food. So if you're getting something shipped in, you don't know the story behind that. You don't know about the farmer that grew it. So for me, I get really excited when there's a story behind it, when I know the farmer, when I know the grower, when it's something that grows in my own backyard. And so for me, I like that rustic, like in your own backyard, farm to table experience.
I'll just point out that those aren't rustic sounds in the background there. Those are the sounds from Bingham's big industrial kitchen, people working there. So we recognize those stories that Moser is telling and that wants to show through her food. But those things that we've sort of faced right now are mostly the settlers' culture. The limited context is what Moser is trying to change a bit. She's talking about illuminating the stories in food that go much further back in history.
So yeah, delve into that. I mean, what are some of the reasons that Indigenous cuisine isn't recognized? I mean, what obstacles is it facing?
Well, there's a couple that I didn't think about. It's becoming slowly more recognized. I think I've heard more chefs cooking now Indigenous foods. I think I'd like to see some restaurants soon. Moser made 2 points, though, that I think are worth noting here.
Obviously, when you're coming to a new country and you see things like bison over cows or ducks over chickens, you're naturally going to be unsure if it's edible, if it tastes good. So the settlers brought a lot of their own food and their own meat, and slowly over time that became Canadian cuisine. The other issue that I find too is that there's still laws against certain foods that the Indigenous community would have. So, for example, you can't serve game meat in a restaurant. I understand why, but there are ways and laws that we could invent instead to make that safe for consumption and for resale.
So that's part of her goal with this. There's sort of I guess there's some, tension or a clash or whatever between two cultures here. And Moser would like to see some of those impediments removed, and she's working toward that. It's certainly something that is on her plate, as it were, for the Cedar Spoon organization.
Well played, pun-wise. What does she hope the Cedar Spoon project can ultimately achieve?
Well, aside from those significant infrastructure obstacles, like laws and health regulations, which Moser notes, she shared with me this.
I want to see more Indigenous food being prepared for the masses. Looking at some of the laws that have been created that are outdated and allowing some of that food to be in restaurants. When I first became a chef, I was striving to find other Indigenous chefs in our community, and I found some, but they're really few and far between, and so it would be really great to mentor and nurture more Indigenous chefs, especially within our community, just giving them that opportunity to know that we have a place.
So I think a noble effort and cause. Cedar Spoon wants to bring more chefs into the light. They're out there. I would love to see the restaurants that cook Indigenous menus because the food is just delicious. But a lot more groundwork needs yet to be done, and that is the task for Moser to grapple with.
Well, and Bingamons, that's a big stage for sure.
It's a help for sure.
Awesome. So just before we let you go, every week you have a